All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Like the announcement said, my name is Darien Long. I'm Senior Vice President at dormakaba, and I'm excited to help moderate this interview with my new friend, Dan Sloat, on the advancements of air mobility and how it's redefining the arrival of the guest from the sky down. Let me tell you a little bit about Dan. Dan Sloat is the founder and president of the Advanced Air Mobility Institute, the leading nonprofit research center dedicated to emerging aviation tech. He is a prior U.S. Air Force captain, private pilot, professor at the Advanced Air Mobility Law and Ethics at the University of Arkansas, and a fellow at the Royal Aeronautical Society, and sits on the World Economic Forum Aviate Committee to advise on the future of autonomous flight. We've got a quick video before we jump into it.
Springfield traffic, good morning. November 504, Lima Papa, all select trails out in the 115 Southeast River March.
Okay, Dan. If we were to think about the 2035 guest journey from a guest leaving their house to arriving at a hotel, what do you think that journey is going to look like? And how's it going to change?
So this is an excellent question, Darien, and I personally, I'm thrilled at how much this will evolve over time. I thought it might be best to describe, here in 2025, given an example that someone is, let's say, in Athens and they find themselves with a free weekend. If they wanted to visit Crete, it would take them at least 10 hours door to door, right? Depending on what time they woke up, how quickly they can get ready, and if they're sufficiently familiar, maybe even know a bit of Greek, that would help. They would arrive in Crete by nightfall. And of course, depending on the time of year, it might be too late for them to even find an open restaurant. For a lot of folks, that kind of transit time between different parts of the same country is likely prohibitive. They would say, I don't even care the cost, it's not worth it. That trip would be a combination of taxi or Uber, ferry, and likely a bus at some point in there. And you have to hit every single one of those transitions exactly right, even to get the 10-hour duration. Now in 2035, there's a very real possibility that you'll be able to go to the rooftop of your hotel in Athens, take one of these eVTOL aircraft, total journey time maybe hour, 20 minutes, and you're in Crete.
Wow.
For reference, Crete is roughly 220 miles from Athens. So to get there in just over an hour really opens up a lot of opportunities.
Okay, I don't want to age myself, but this sounds very much like the Jetsons. Are you telling me that that is a real possibility? And what even is air mobility? Like, what does that even mean?
So at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute, the way that we defined AAM is the scope involves 4 different elements. It's all things autonomous aviation, right? So think of Waymo of the skies, fully self-flying, pilotless flight. It's uncrewed aerial systems, what most people refer to as drones. It's smart infrastructure. Now that's both the digital infrastructure that's starting to be implemented in traditional aviation to increase our broader awareness of aircraft, whether they have a pilot on board or not. And then 4th, the sustainable propulsion. And that's such a huge element of this, doing everything we can in aviation to reduce our carbon footprint and ideally not degrade the quality of the air that we breathe.
Okay, so we're in the middle of a government shutdown right now, but I would have to imagine that this will become highly, regulated. What type of legislation do you think will come? What digital infrastructure do you think is going to be needed to really make this vision come to fruition?
So yes, we're actually seeing a tremendous amount of interest from the current administration. In fact, there was an executive order that was issued on June 6th this year. It's stylized often as an effort to increase drone dominance in the United States, but these aircraft that will be passenger carrying on a larger scale are very much implicated. U.S. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy is also leading an effort called the eVTOL Integration Pilot Program. We're really trying to understand how intuitive these new avionics systems are and how do we ramp up the pilot training pipeline for that. You're absolutely right, Darien. This is going to be closely regulated. The FAA has quite a bit of interest in ensuring that aviation continues to be the safest mode of travel.
As do I. Someone who travels a lot, right?
Yes, and to tie it into a recent situation, many of us probably heard about the incident, the mid-air collision with a helicopter over DC. Congress acted on that and has recently passed the Rotor Act. This is an effort to make sure that aircraft not only transmit out their exact location, speed, and trajectory, but each aircraft can also take in that input. And so instead of the information going to the respective air traffic control tower and then people trying to determine and maintain safety distances, these aircraft will be able to communicate directly to each other and give those pilots much greater advance warning if they are in fact on any kind of near miss or collision course.
How do you envision this working if it is a pilotless aircraft?
How do I envision how to pilot it?
Well, just, if another plane's close by, right, and I'm a passenger in a pilotless aircraft, how will that plane know to respond?
So an excellent question. As a pilot myself, of course, we have to know and implement at a moment's notice what we call the rules of the road, right? Every pilot knows when you're on some kind of collision course exactly how to deviate on both sides in order to ensure, even if they aren't being coordinated by a shared tower service,
Sure.
that they can still avoid those, what we call see and avoid operations.
Yeah. I think we're figuring that out on the ground right now, right, with Waymos. So
Right.
be a good first step. Okay, so Dan, this isn't an entirely new concept. I think there are other places in the globe who are further along in their air mobility journey. Tell us what's going on in other places and how are hotels or similar industries leveraging air mobility today?
Yes. So I go to quite a few conferences exploring how advanced air mobility can complement various industries. And a lot of people assume that we're talking about something, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Maybe folks feel like it's not going to be in my lifetime. Well, the fact is the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. In fact, today in China, you can get aboard an aircraft without a pilot. today. This EH216 produced by EHang was type certified at the end of 2023, and they have been undertaking pilot routes to see where the most demand is present. That particular vehicle is fully electric. It can fly for about 15 to 20 minutes. So the primary use case right now is aerial tourism.
Okay.
But of course, a huge advantage, not only is it not degrading the air, right? Its noise footprint is substantially lower, right? Many of us have had a conventional helicopter come screaming overhead and it is obnoxious. Certainly if it's the case that a helicopter, has the familiar markings, whether it be a red cross or a red crescent, depending on where you're in the world, and you acknowledge that the purpose of this flight is to save lives, the vast majority of people, of course, are very much in support. But when it comes to aerial tourism, there are a lot of cities with active nonprofits and protest groups working hard to ensure that non-essential helicopter operations do not take place in their respective city. It very much destroys any sense of, peace and quiet.
Right. Right. Okay. So what would this cost? I'm a hotel guest and maybe I want to shorten my commute from the airport to my hotel. What should I expect to pay in today's lifetime?
So the example that I gave in China, unless the hotels are quite, you live quite close to the hotel, that's not going to be a great fit. But what's exciting is actually, could I get a quick show of hands? Anyone here from the Libra group?
Libra? Is that what you said?
Libra?
Libra. No?
Well, their Greek contingent, Aria Hotels, they worked closely with, as you saw in the video earlier, Beta Technologies. They're already making plans that were announced back in 2022 to build vertiports at 4 different hotels. They have about 70 properties in Greece, just for reference. 4 different vertiports, an investment of roughly 50 million euro. And they will, and as part of that budget, they'll be leasing 10 Beta eVTOL aircraft. Now, because this is an entirely new form of aircraft, we're finding that the type certification pathway is pretty extensive. And naturally, these investors are eager to get a return. So Beta has made a slight pivot. They've paused their eVTOL, the vertical takeoff and landing variant, and they're focusing their efforts on the conventional takeoff, the vehicle that we saw that competed in an event that the AM Institute hosted recently. I can touch on that a bit more later. But this aircraft, you saw some of the price range. Estimates are maybe in the 300 to 400 range. This is really a case where we can open up a lot of new opportunities, especially in a place like Greece. I tend to think that any kind of trip that involves over water, right, where for all intents and purposes, a ferry is about your only option, it's going to make an enormous difference in the cost savings. And because of that lower noise profile, you don't have to worry about disturbing your guests on site who maybe don't have an interest. They don't mind taking the ferry. Maybe they even feel that that's part of the Greek experience.
Sure. So, I mean, these are electric. I think generally speaking, we think about electric as a sustainable option. So, I mean, what's the take on sustainability here?
Yes. Now, this is something that's very important to the AM Institute. We maintain transparency on this, exactly what will be the environmental impacts. Aircraft that are fully electric, operating on battery power, the operations themselves are zero emission. But if we really are committed to reducing that negative impact, we have to take a close look at how that electricity is being generated, right? We need to have calls to ensure that that generation is from renewable sources and that it's new. Because otherwise, then we start we start eating into the grid's overall capacity. And of course, then that has implications where there's a bit more fragility in the grid itself. In the event that there's a storm, that could lead to brownouts and blackouts.
Yep.
But I will quickly say there's an interesting study taking place between NASA and NREL that they are pursuing an effort to say, well, if we're investing to increase the electrical capacity at airports for these new electric aircraft, what if we increased it to such an extent that now airports actually help to reduce the chances and risk of brownout and blackout for the surrounding community? And that's something that's a real game changer. We're confident that a lot of communities will say, okay, maybe I don't have an interest in taking one of these fancy new electric air taxis, but I would love knowing that, you know, we can keep the lights on at my home, we can keep all the food in our fridge.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of effort here beyond just the air operationist.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit. As someone who's in the security industry, you know, we talked about a medical use case for medical travel, but are there any security use cases where air mobility could be helpful for hotels?
Yes. So through the use of thermal imaging on drones, we can actually maintain 24/7 awareness of all, both people and wildlife that could present a risk to your guests for the entirety of your property. In fact, I advise a startup that's working on some pretty cool solutions to keep drones up perpetually. Mm-hmm. So pretty quickly here, we're going to have a lot of information that management at a hotel can act on and be more informed. In the event that there is some kind of risk to your guests, you can know about it immediately.
So we talked about, you talked about landing on the roof for dropping a guest off and how that might change the guest arrival. From an infrastructure standpoint of the hotel, as they think about renovations that might be coming up and how the guest experience might be changing, it's hard to predict exactly where adoption will be over the next couple of years, but what are some infrastructure things that they should consider if this is something that interests them that they might want to add?
Yes. So as I shared, of course, these are much lower noise profile than conventional helicopters.
Much quieter than that, I think, for sure.
But they are not completely silent, right? So if there's an interest to maintain kind of a sense of serenity,
sure,
at your resort, you might want to consider siting these vertiports at one of the extremes of your property. In the event that that's not a concern, you could certainly make use of perhaps an existing parking structure. That would be a fantastic alternative use. Especially because then the guests, as soon as they disembark from the eVTOL, they could have, you know, easy access to their vehicles for visits in town.
Okay. So I think we're going to save the last question that's going to kind of wrap things up, but we do want to open it up to the audience, if that's okay. Does anyone have any specific questions that you'd like to ask Dan? Okay, we've got one here at the front. Thank you. Hold on, you got a mic coming for you right now, okay?
Oh my gosh. We don't have these at parking conferences that I go to. We had the pleasure of connecting earlier a little bit, and I wanted to learn more about the first of its kind event that you hosted on October 12th this month. It was a AI aviation race. Can you tell us more about that? It seemed pretty cool.
Yes, thank you so much. It's at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. We hosted the first ever all-electric air race crewed in world history. This race very much showcases just how much progress we've made in electric aviation. What's interesting about this, not only were we able to do it on the exact centennial of the last running of the Pulitzer, the Pulitzer air races from the 1920s, which if anyone's, you know, a bit of a history buff, those were that was the place to set absolute speed records on the planet. Year over year, they increased from roughly 150 miles per hour when they started in 1920, and by 1925, almost 250 miles an hour. The fastest that any human had ever gone in history at the time. For a number of different reasons, that race was sunset. And so our nonprofit negotiated a naming license to revive that race series, to encourage people to recognize, because there was something very human about the regional impetus for the Pulitzer. If you take a step back in time and think about the average American in 1920, they were still riding horses, right? They had heard of cars, right? Henry Ford up in Detroit, but they had never seen a car with their own eyes in 1920. So when rumors started going around that there were these flying machines, most people said, absolutely not. You'd have to think that I'm some kind of idiot to believe that we as human civilization have mastered that technology. And so the Pulitzer races, not only did it give fantastic incentive for aerospace engineers to really push the limits, to increase our speeds more and more every single year, it also illuminated for a lot of military leaders just how powerful this tool could be as a means of national security. It sunset in 1925, and so we wanted to make an effort, taking a page from the history books, to say, at the end of the day, we're afraid of what we don't know and what we don't understand. And so we're doing what we can to host public awareness campaigns and let everyday people come out and see for themselves, witness these fully electric aircraft take off and land safely and consistently under control. So certainly anyone who's interested in this space, maybe you want to discuss how advanced air mobility might be integrated into your hotel operations, I'd be more than happy to speak with you afterwards.
Okay. Any last questions before we go to our final comment? We've got one up here.
This is actually kind of a question for both of you.
little bit
I think about the infrastructure that you have to develop and how that can kind of relate to hotels. So for Darien, how do you kind of see this from an access perspective of somebody in the future being able to seamlessly kind of go from their room, use their phone, get into their plane, go to another location? And then from your perspective, Dan, how do you kind of see this affecting the infrastructure of hotels? So if, your Greece example, if I'm a brand owner of a hotel and I have properties all throughout Greece, how do you kind of see this affecting how hotel development actually works with this new kind of mode of transportation?
Well, I'm the moderator. I wasn't expecting that. I'm just kidding. So no, I think that's interesting. I think that you're likely to probably see some sort of membership with a single pass that goes across the entire guest experience and journey, right? Where, just like maybe Uber will decide to invest in these types of air mobility vehicles. And I have now a single pass experience in my wallet that ties my Uber to my Marriott stay, where I'm provisioned one sort of pass across the entire experience is tied to me and less tied to the individual companies that might be supporting that guest journey. Yeah. But who knows?
So Darien mentioned Uber, and back in 2016, Uber hosted they published a white paper, Uber Elevate, in which they explored this idea. How could they use their same core model to connect users with their smartphone with on-demand air travel? Naturally, at the time, they made use of conventional helicopters. This was launched in New York City. Sounds like you may be familiar with the background there. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a group of people, if you can imagine, yes, even residents in New York City care about the noise levels. And so this group was able to effectively get a ban in place for non-essential helicopters. And that really was a catalyst in this space to say, okay, is it possible to make use of air as a travel medium within the same city, but not be such a burden and destroy that peace and quiet? I will say that electric aviation, for anyone who's maybe not, they don't necessarily prioritize the carbon footprint, a huge advantage of electric aircraft over conventional, especially in the public safety context, is that electric aircraft, they don't need the same kind of spool up time. Even a medevac helicopter with a pilot that's ready to go on standby, it will take at least the first 5 minutes is just waiting for the engine to warm up, doing all their various checks. But with an electric aircraft, they can go within the first 30 seconds. And when lives are on the line,
Yeah, exactly.
that makes an enormous difference.
Okay.
So in the hotel industry, it could be something rather interesting to invest even in a single eVTOL, have that available on standby, and provide a bit of peace of mind for your hotel guests, especially if your hotel property is a bit more remote, a bit further from the next available emergency room. This could be something that you say, in the event that you need, you need to be rushed there, it won't cost you $30,000 an hour with a, traditional medevac. We can get you to the emergency room much, much faster and much safer than you can today.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Dan. So if we were to kind of sum it up with 3 takeaways that you could give a hotel operator, an owner, or an investor, any place that they could maybe continue to learn more as well about this topic if they're interested, what are those 3 takeaways that you would leave them with?
Well, of course, the Advanced Air Mobility Institute as a nonprofit research center. And by the way, we have liaisons now in 80 countries. So it's likely that we have, boots on the ground wherever you operate. And we are continuing to expand. So happy to be a resource. That's very much our mission, to educate and advocate. Our website, by the way, is aaminstitute.org. Anyone who's interested. There are so many resources. NASA is doing a lot of incredible things. Of course, the FAA is heavily invested here. The World Economic Forum is particularly focused on how can autonomous air operations actually increase the exercise of our human rights, right? Things like freedom of movement. We want to make sure that these are designed in a way that perhaps someone who's particularly critical of their national government is not targeted in a way that they aren't permitted to use this new mode of transport. So there are this is going to touch on a lot of different facets of society, but we're eager to be a strong voice on behalf of everyday people. And that, of course, certainly includes guests at your various properties.
And I can imagine we're all going to need to spend time on the Hill to help advocate for this in the right way for the industry. So, well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's been a pleasure learning about this topic. Who knew, like I said, that other parts of the world were already so far along in this journey. And I'm excited to kind of see it mature here.
Thank you.
But thanks, everyone.